You know, the season's got to go on. We do have to hit our season goals, so we need ground and we need it fast.
Rick Ness had one shot left before another mining dream collapsed. The season was grinding on, costs were climbing, and every wrong move pushed the whole operation closer to the edge. Then, hidden in the wild like a secret nobody wanted found, a massive rusted trommel appeared out of the brush. The machine was half buried, swallowed by dirt, vines, and years of neglect, but the ground around it was loaded with gold worth an estimated $500 million. And before the story reveals how a dead machine turned into a gold-printing monster, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe, because this discovery changes everything about what abandoned ground and old machines can really mean. The Trommel looked finished. Steel plates were eaten by rust, hoses were split, and the drum sat frozen in place as if it had not moved in decades. Tailings piles slumped around it, soaked with rain and packed hard by time. On paper, this was forgotten equipment on played-out ground that smarter miners had already walked away from. In reality, the first test pens taken from the untouched sediment near the trommel told a very different story. Gold showed up fast, and not just a few specks. Concentrations were higher than anything most crews ever see in a full season. That alone made no sense. If the ground was this rich, why had the machine been abandoned? Why had nobody come back? Why had such an expensive piece of gear been left to rot? The more the crew looked, the more the scene felt wrong. No sign of a proper shutdown, no careful packing or stripping of parts, just a mining operation frozen in the middle of its story. The trommel stood there like a question mark made of steel and rust, guarding a fortune that nobody had claimed. This trommel had not been designed for beauty or comfort. It had been built for one job: chew through mountains of dirt and separate gold from everything else. The drum would spin, water would pound the material, larger rocks would tumble out the far end, and gold-bearing gravel would fall onto recovery equipment. It was brute force mining, the kind that came from an older generation of engineering. Strong frames, thick steel, simple controls, and engines that only cared about torque and fuel. That kind of power came with a big problem. Old mining tech focused on big chunks and obvious gold. Screens and riffles were good at catching larger pieces. But fine gold, the tiny flakes and dust that can be worth a fortune when recovered properly, slipped right through the gaps. Day after day, season after season, thousands of ounces of fine gold were washed out the back with the tailings and dumped in piles labeled waste. At the time, that was normal. The focus stayed on what could be seen easily in the pan and the sluice. What could not be seen was ignored. Modern miners understand that those tailings are often where the real hidden value sits, with better mats, finer screens, and smarter recovery systems. Today's setups can pull gold out of material older crews never had a chance to capture. That is exactly what made this abandoned trommel so dangerous and so exciting. The old crew had already run massive volumes of pay through it. The machine had done its job the way it was designed, but that design was out of date. A huge amount of gold had simply slipped through and settled into the ground beneath and around the machine. Over the years, stories surfaced about a mysterious operation out there. Talk of miners who ran out of money mid-season. Talk of partners who stopped speaking to each other. Talk of paperwork that never got filed, and a shutdown that happened too fast. Some called it financial trouble. Others whispered about deals that went wrong or quiet pressure from people who wanted the land empty. On the surface, it looked like another failed project, but the discovery of that trommel, sitting in gold-rich dirt, showed that failure was not the full story. Someone had worked incredibly rich ground, left a fortune in fine gold behind, and walked away from the very machine that could unlock it. Freeing the trommel from its grave turned into a project all by itself. The machine was sunk deep into packed ground, welded in place by rust and time. Every move had to be planned. Heavy equipment had to be brought in carefully over rough terrain. The area around the trommel needed to be cleared, not just for access, but to make sure nothing shifted unexpectedly and crushed anyone working nearby. As the crew scraped away layers of old tailings and mud, samples were taken constantly. Every bucket, every cut around the trommel was tested. The results kept coming back strong. This was not low-grade material. This was the kind of gold content most miners only see in dreams or in stories told at the end of a long season. That changed the entire timeline. Leaving the trommel behind was no longer an option. The machine had to be removed, repaired, and put back to work as soon as possible, before rumors drew attention from every rival claim within driving distance. Word spreads fast in mining regions. Fuel deliveries, equipment rentals, and even casual conversations in town can turn into intelligence for curious competitors. As soon as talk talk started about a big Trommel found in forgotten ground with strong test results, eyes turned toward the area. Some wanted information, others wanted a piece of the action. That kind of pressure turns a slow project into a race. Once the Trommel was finally lifted free from the dirt and moved to a workable site, the real test began. The decision was made to build a hybrid system around it. Old strength would be combined with new precision. The Trommel's raw material handling power would be kept, but the recovery side would be modern. New sluices, better riffles, and fine gold mats were added. The goal was simple: no second chance for gold to escape this time. The surrounding ground became the first target. Tailings that had been thrown away by the old operation now became pay dirt. Every scoop feeding the Trommel represented another chance to pull gold that older miners had unknowingly walked away from. The machine had once been a symbol of an operation that stopped. Now it was being turned into the engine of a comeback.
While mechanics and welders rebuilt the Trommel, another kind of digging happened in storage rooms in old offices. Stacks of papers, faded photographs, folded survey maps, and dusty ledgers began to reveal the story behind the abandoned machine. Pieces of information slowly lined up. The Trommel had been part of a bigger plan, not a one-off project. Old maps showed multiple cuts and work areas linked by water lines and roads. Production notes hinted at strong early results. There were mentions of expansion, new equipment orders, and long-term plans. Then the trail suddenly broke. Reports stopped mid-page. Some records were half complete. Certain folders looked like pages had been pulled out. A pattern appeared. Things had been going well, maybe too well, and then everything simply ended. On site, the physical evidence matched that feeling. The Trommel had not been stripped for parts the way most machines are when a mine shuts down cleanly. Valuable pieces were still attached. Components that would normally be removed and sold were sitting in place, rusting quietly. That hinted at a shutdown that happened faster than expected, maybe even under pressure. Away from the claim, the story took on a life of its own. People started connecting drone footage, ground tests, and old maps. Online discussions suggested that the abandoned Trommel was more than just a sign of bad business. Some viewers pointed to strange patterns in the cuts and tailings, wondering if earlier miners had followed even older workings. The phrase "ancient hidden civilizations" appeared in comments and theories, not as proven fact, but as the kind of dramatic explanation people reach for when evidence does not match the official story. What is known for sure is simpler. Miners from previous decades worked this land with everything they had. They faced brutal conditions, heavy machinery, and constant financial pressure. They chased gold through this Trommel day after day, probably never realizing how much fine gold slipped straight past their systems. When the money stopped or the problems stacked too high, the operation froze in place and never came back. Now that same machine was being given a second life, and the ground it once processed as waste was about to prove how wrong that label really was. The Trommel became not just a tool, but a link between two eras of mining, each dealing with the same dirt in completely different ways. The moment the refurbished Trommel fired up again, the entire site felt different. Fresh steel glowed in places where rust used to dominate. New hoses, pumps, and belts lined the frame. Modern engines growled where tired old motors once struggled. The drum that had been locked in place for years now spun smoothly, chewing through material like it had been built yesterday. This time, everything left that drum passed over recovery systems designed for fine detail. Instead of rough, old-style riffles alone, the setup used better mats, tighter screens, and smarter water flow. Every stage was tuned to trap the tiny dust and flakes that older crews had never managed to hold onto. From the first hours of full operation, cleanup results started raising eyebrows. Gold was showing up in heavy, steady quantities. The more of the old tailings and surrounding ground that went through the Trommel, the clearer the picture became. The abandoned operation had been sitting on a gold field that still had huge value locked in it. Truck after truck of material was processed, and the numbers continued to climb. The Trommel, once written off as junk, was now functioning like a money printer. Instead of barely paying for fuel and wages, the gold totals began to move into life-changing territory. The idea of $500 million in total potential value no longer sounded like wild hype. It sounded like a realistic estimate for what this ground could deliver when processed properly. News of the turnaround spread.
Miners in other regions began calling suppliers, asking about used equipment, old trommels, and forgotten plants. Investors started looking differently at dead sites. Equipment that had been sitting behind shops covered in snow and dust suddenly looked like a possible ticket to a revival. Environmental conversations started shifting as well. Running a rebuilt machine on old disturbed ground caused far less new damage than tearing up fresh valleys, cutting new roads, and ripping out untouched streams. Some of the loudest critics of mining operations were forced to admit that this kind of approach had real benefits. By reworking old tailings and giving existing machines a second life, miners could pull serious gold while keeping new scars on the land to a minimum. The Trommel had become proof that profit and better practice did not always have to fight each other. Instead of standing as a monument to failure, it now stood as an example of smarter thinking.
As strong as the results were, an uncomfortable pattern appeared in the numbers. Some parts of the system were capturing far more gold than others. On certain runs, one side of the recovery line seemed to be carrying the entire load. That kind of imbalance suggested a feed issue, a blocked chute, or uneven distribution inside the trommel. Millions in gold were at stake, so guesswork could not be allowed to guide decisions. The machine was shut down and inspected again. Every weld, every plate, every point where material flowed was checked. Engineers studied the flow path from hopper to drum and from drum to sluice. At the same time, geologists took a fresh look at the layout of the claim itself. Drone technology became a key part of the process. High-resolution images of the terrain were captured from above, showing subtle lines and shapes that were impossible to see standing on the ground. Old cuts, filled-in trenches, and faint patterns in the tailings piles told a silent story about where the previous operation had focused its efforts and where it had backed away. That bird's-eye view revealed something important. The richest sections of ground did not line up neatly with the old maps. Some of the finished areas still held strong potential. Underground layers turned out to run deeper and in different directions than expected. Places that had been labeled "worked out" by earlier crews were actually sitting on untouched or poorly processed material. As those findings came in, the long-term picture started to change. This was no longer just a story about one trommel and one patch of dirt. It became a blueprint for how to look at countless other abandoned sites. Old mining towns nearby felt the shift first. Repair shops picked up more jobs. Suppliers moved more hoses, fuel, and parts. Restaurants saw new faces. Families that had watched mines close and paychecks vanish suddenly had reasons to hope that the ground around them still held value. The industry as a whole began to pay attention. Modern, expensive machinery had dominated budgets and attention for years. Now, a rebuilt, decades-old trommel was challenging that thinking, showing that with smart upgrades and careful planning, older equipment could punch far above its weight. Teams like Parker's, already known for pushing production and finding ways to cut waste, began treating forgotten machines as serious assets instead of junk. Environmental voices took notice again as more operations considered reworking old sites instead of cutting new ones. The Trommel's success exposed a simple truth. The gold rush never really ended. It just shifted into places most people stopped looking.
In the beginning, the Trommel was just a rusted giant, half buried in the bush, a reminder of a crew that pushed hard, hit a wall, and vanished from the claim. By the time the story reached its current chapter, that same machine had become something entirely different. It turned from scrap into a symbol of what happens when stubborn belief meets smarter technology. The abandoned ground around it revealed gold on a scale that pushed total value estimates toward the $500 million mark. Fine gold that had slipped away during old runs finally ended up where it always belonged, in the recovery system, not in forgotten tailings piles. The machine's comeback forced miners, investors, engineers, and environmental groups to ask hard questions. How many other trommels, wash plants, and pieces of junk had been written off too early? How many tailings piles, waste dumps, and supposedly finished cuts were still hiding serious gold that older setups never captured? The mystery behind the original shutdown still hangs in the air. Maybe it was nothing more than money troubles, broken deals, and bad timing. Maybe someone made a choice to walk away without understanding how much value remained in the ground. Or maybe there was a deeper story, one tied to missing records, sudden silence,
and the kind of pressure that never shows up on public reports. Theories about hidden fortunes, buried mistakes, and even ancient workings will always follow a story like this. What can be seen clearly is the impact. A single forgotten trommel, dragged out of the dirt, rebuilt, and pushed back into service, managed to change how an entire industry looks at its past. Instead of chasing only brand new machines in untouched valleys, miners are now scanning old maps and drone images for long-forgotten operations and equipment that might hold one more life-changing run. The old belief that mining has to mean fresh destruction for fresh profit took a direct hit. This project showed that reworking the past can be powerful, profitable, and less damaging than carving out something new. The rusted giant that once stood as a warning about failure now stands as proof that opportunity often hides where nobody bothers to look. The comments section is now the place for every theory about what really happened here. Lost fortune, hidden crime, or something even more startling buried under years of silence. And for more stories of forgotten machines, lost gold, and operations brought back from the dead, the like button deserves a hit, and a subscription to Gold Era 2.0 makes sure the next discovery arrives the moment it drops.